Good afternoon. Welcome to our live chat series. My name is Stephanie Rivera. I'm a reporter with the Long Beach Post. And today I'm joined by Beto Lopez, Project Director of Long Beach Residents Empowered. Beto, thanks for joining us.
Hello, everyone. Super excited to be here. As Stephanie said, my name is Norberto Lopez, current project director at Libre. And Libre is a nonprofit organization in the city of Long Beach that helps out tenants with any of their housing issues right now that are happening not only during the pandemic but prior to the pandemic. Whether they're being evicted or they're facing some sort of harassment, we're there to help. And we're there to empower the community here in Long Beach to ensure that people know their rights in order to advocate for themselves and their community members.
So I wanted to get right into it. It's a very popular topic, very important for Long Beach renters, which make up the majority of the city too, over half. So I wanted to start with you kind of addressing what are the kind of protections that are currently in place for the tenant in Long Beach right now.
So as many people know, right, there's a moratorium currently in place, an eviction moratorium for non-payment of rent. And as of right now, it's due to expire May 31st, which is coming up right around the corner. And so hopefully tonight, there will be a first step to elongating, that eviction moratorium. There's also, just the basics like state laws as well, from AB 1482, which is that rent can't be increased 5% plus whatever the CPI is right now, or the max being 10%. But more than anything, I think that the current position that we're in with like COVID-19 is like the repayment period. Also, after the moratorium ends, is a 6-month repayment period, and so we're also hoping that tonight we take the first step at elongating that to a 12-month period. But of course, that's like a longer conversation. But just real quick, I'll go ahead and cover some of the AB 1482 protections, meaning that folks cannot be kicked out of their unit, right? For whatever reason. There has to be a just cause reason for them to get evicted of their unit. There are 4 reasons on why a tenant can be kicked out, one of them being substantial rehab, which is something that we helped address in February by passing, with our Close the Loophole campaign with other community organizations. And that was to address that, right, where there was mass evictions happening due to substantial rehab. But now, in order for a landlord to kick somebody out for substantial rehab, they have to have the permits and they also have to attach them to the notices. So that's a little bit about it, right? Also, the rent increase piece, like a rent increase can only be increased once a year if it matches like the max allowed percentage.
Okay. So to be clear, tenants can still be evicted for the substantial rehab if the landlords have the appropriate documentation. Is there any other that are some of the common reasons why folks can still be evicted, just so they know that what is protected right now and what isn't?
Yeah, so the eviction moratorium currently in place in Long Beach, right, only covers non-payment of rent. So you won't be kicked out of your unit if you don't pay your rent, but you do have to follow certain steps. You do have to send in a letter to the landlord stating that you've been impacted by COVID-19 and that for those reasons you cannot pay, right? It could be loss of job, loss of income, it can be rise in medical costs. Um, but you do have to take those steps. You can't just not pay your rent because then you'll be issued a 3-day pay or quit, which then leads to an eviction process. Just to be clear, though, no one is going to get evicted right now. The eviction process can still take place in the sense that the landlord can still file, but it won't be heard or like won't be seen till the courts come back into play. And this is after the judicial council rule, which states that as of right now, the way it stands is that the evictions won't be heard till 90 days after the state of emergency is lifted by the governor, but it can be amended. And we actually know that there are efforts right now by landlords and landlord association groups, to make this happen. They want the courts to open. They want to evict people. And so, we're all over that. We're trying to make sure that we keep people home during this time. Yeah.
Okay. That kind of leads me into talking about tonight and what the council is going to be considering tonight, which, as you mentioned before, it's about extending the eviction moratorium to next May of 2021. And that would be just to be in line with the county and with the city of LA, that was one of my other questions, was that what applies to LA County and LA City residents is not the same for Long Beach right now, right?
That is correct. And just to clarify on like what's going on tonight, it's to extend the moratorium for another 90 days, meaning that August 31st would be kind of the date, and then people would have to start repaying rent September 1st, and we'll have all the way till September 1st, 2021 to repay all the rent that's owed. Um, I mean, it's a tough topic, right, for someone such as a landlord who looks for profit, right? And we understand, and I like to be very clear about this as well. It's like we're not after the mom and pop landlords. Like we understand that they're struggling the same way that the tenants are struggling, but we're after the big corporate landlords that are, profiting off of what's happening, off of the housing crisis, and actually putting people in the streets. That's who we're really after. The reason being is because, you know, it's tough. And so if we don't extend this moratorium, it's going to lead to a lot more people being kicked out of their homes. Just to also then, it's like the repayment period, right? Rather than the 6 month period that's currently standing, we would like it to go to the 12 month to just fall in line with the county and the cities around Long Beach, such as Los Angeles, right? That have a 12-month repayment period, just to not create confusion amongst tenants. And we always get the question, hey, is it true that do I fall under the county law, right, that gives me 12 months? And so we always tell them, no, you know what, like the way that the county law works is if the city that you live in has their own policy, then you don't qualify for the county. But as of right now, with the emergency powers under the pandemic, the county law, if Long Beach didn't have any law, it would be superseded by the county. But as of now, Long Beach has a law that's standing, and hopefully today we take that first step of extending it and making it better.
And I wanted to take this time to remind readers that they can submit questions for Beto if they have any. We did get one where it talks, I think you addressed this just a moment ago about what about landlords who still have mortgages and bills to pay? And I think you addressed that as far as like the mom and pops who really rely on that too, that, it is taking that into consideration.
And yeah, and I mean there's a lot of relief happening, that there's more relief for landlords, right, or property owners and homeowners compared to like the tenants, right? There's companies or like mortgage companies that are saying, okay, well, just tack on your debt or whatever you owe to either when you sell the property, if you sell the property, or we'll just attach it to your loan. So
Mhm.
there's different relief programs that are happening, right? There's more understanding. I feel like for property owners and the tenants, I think that there's just much more happening for them. And nonetheless, in the list of demands of like the Housing Justice Coalition, we're also asking the city to advocate, right, for mortgage suspension, right, to see what they can do to, at the federal level, at the state level, to really help out property owners as well. It's like, or if we're really going to be in this together, I think this is a moment where landlords, housing providers, as they like to say, should also take into consideration a lot of the struggles that the low income renter is going through right now.
So moving into that council agenda item that's going to be tonight, we talked about the extension of the eviction moratorium and the back pay extension as well. There's another component which is the harassment protection. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that piece is vital. I think it's one of the most important pieces. I mean, the whole three-piece policy is important, but we've seen a rise in, harassment happening from landlords, and I get it. Some folks are like desperate for their money. They need the money as well, and we get it, but I don't think it's right that they're taking it out on the tenant who has no control over the situation, right? They have no control over them losing their job, right? Or their kids being home longer, meaning that more food has to go into the household as well. Um, and so we've seen extreme cases to the point where people are like getting threatened, right? To that, hey, we're gonna ruin your credit if you don't pay your rent or if you don't give me anything.
Hmm.
People are being asked to sign deferment payment stuff, and it's like, give us whatever money you can. There's been extreme cases where someone said, and this is through our legal clinic that we host every Wednesday. Someone said, is it fair or is it okay for my landlord to ask me for my bank statements for the past 3 months? Is it okay if they ask me if I received my stimulus check already? And so the answer to all of those is like, no, they shouldn't be asking you this. You shouldn't sign anything.
There has been some who would say, why can't people who are getting federal assistance, whether through the stimulus check, why isn't it okay for them to say, if you get that, you can pay rent? Well, can you explain that?
Yeah, I think it goes on a case by case basis, right? Not every case is the same. Not every household is the same. right? There's some households that have more people in the unit, right, than others. There are some folks that can pay rent, and they are going to pay rent if they'd like to. Um, Nonetheless, we when we talk about why we need these protections, we're talking about the low income renter that's facing a lot of the issues, right? Mixed status families as well who aren't receiving those checks. That's who we're referring to when we're doing all this advocacy, right? Small, like low income folks who just cannot deal with the burden of rent right now because then they're put in the situation, do I feed my kids or do we pay rent and keep a roof over our head? Both are vital pieces to the survival of a person, especially when we talk about like children. I think that's like the biggest piece for us. It's like development, right? Especially for the young children. Imagine them. They're already being stressed out at the fact that they can't go to school. And now adding on to the burden, right? My parents are stressed because we don't know if we're going to eat or not. So that's what we're talking about when we do this advocacy. It's like low income families. And we understand that, people always say, oh, people are going to take advantage of it. But like, at the end of the day, like landlords always get their way.
Well, one of the questions was about how, if someone's being harassed by their landlord, what do you recommend they tell them, or how do they defend themselves?
So in that sense, it's like, what we do at Libre is that we help write a letter, right, to the landlord stating under the state law that they cannot be harassing someone. They can't harass someone either on their immigration status. And so the reason why we need a local policy is to have like teeth, right? What we would say a stronger grip, something more local, something that allows us to say, hey, there's a local policy in Long Beach that doesn't allow you to do this. And so when we do write out those letters, we're able to point somewhere at the
Mhm.
local level, and we don't have to send them out to like the state code.
Okay, and we're getting another question similar to that. So I would just say, tell folks to reach out to Libre for help with creating that letter that they can give to their landlord. So if they keep on asking them every month for money, that this is a letter that they can present to them, citing the
Mhm.
local policies.
That's if we get this local policy, right? And we also have to see how strong the local policy ends up at, because we don't know what's going to happen tonight, what comments are going to be made, right? We understand that there's both sides to the issue, and at the end of the day, whatever ends up getting like passed, that's what we will have to work with. And there's no enforcement in Long Beach, so it will end up falling on the organizations and the tenants, right, to address this. And this helps us out a lot in the sense that if we have to go to court, we have something to fight with.
Got it. We have another question from a landlord who wants to keep their tenants safe and sheltered, but still wants to meet their mortgage obligation. It's regarding SB 1410. There is no way a renter or landlord with mortgage to play catch up unless SB 1410 passes. How can we ensure both tenants and landlords are protected if this SB 1410 doesn't pass?
So that's at the state level, right? That's a current policy or a bill that's being sponsored by Senator Lino Gonzalez. And so I think that they have a lot of levy and they're pushing hard. I'm saying they, as in the California Apartment Association, right? They're co-sponsoring this bill, and so it's gonna have a lot of support from people with money. And so, what are the likelihoods of it passing? We're not sure. What is it going to look like? What's going to be the final product? It still has to go through the process. But nonetheless, like I said, I think that there's way much more help for like property owners compared to like the tenants. And I appreciate that the landlord that's doing the good thing, right? Keeping their tenants sheltered and not trying to kick people out.
Um, just going down the line on mine. I guess, just kind of pivoting to what resources are available for tenants right now. What are some that you've been, when tenants go to you, what are some of the common resources that you're letting them know about?
So I think that the biggest resource that we've been able to like really partner with and work with is like the Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles, right? To provide legal resources to people who are currently facing either an eviction or facing some sort of housing problem. Um, a lot of it lands on us, right? When we have to like advocate for the tenant, but we also help empower the tenant to advocate for themselves. And also, right, joining together with their neighbors is one of our biggest like tool in our toolkit, right? It's like ensuring that they start talking to neighbors in a safe way during this time to build relationship. because a lot of them are going through the same thing. They just don't know it because they're not talking to each other. And so, we've organized buildings to, organize and to fight back against the displacement, and it works. And so that's, I guess, the biggest thing is talk to your neighbors, build solidarity amongst one another. At the end of the day, it's like we're all going through it right now. And so I think this is a moment where we really have to come out as people.
I know some folks had said about, talking to your landlord if you have that kind of relationship too before it even gets to a point where you need a protest. Is that something that you recommend as well?
Yeah, I mean, that's I guess it leads to one of the biggest points that I personally work with, right? It's like I'm not against the mom and pop landlords. They actually know their tenants and they build relationships with them. It comes on back down to the corporate landlordship, where they don't know the tenants that are going into their units because they have a property management company that manages it for them, and they think that they're above the law at points, threatening tenants. As of right now, this morning, we received notices of people who are going to have a water shut off due to remodeling during a pandemic. Like, these are people who need these resources. And I can be open about it, right? Like, in those units, there's someone who's pregnant, right? They're asking about window remodeling during this time. Why are we gonna put people, when we're talking about social distancing, right? Stay at home orders and all this, when we're not keeping the residents who are obeying the laws safe?
That brings up a question that I had about, where is the line between regular maintenance and like utility shutoffs, and harassment? Like, have you, how do you distinguish that line? And I will say too that I just spoke, or I think last week I spoke with Linda Tatum of the city in charge of talking about construction, and she did say that all construction's allowed. They're just let some property management companies or building owners ask them if they can hold off anything that is not necessary or an emergency till after the pandemic, but
Mhm.
they haven't been issuing any fees or fines or anything like that. So you just kind of have to hope that they're good folks.
I mean, this is such a good question. Like, I mean, this is the cases that we hear, right? There's companies that are still remodeling, and we get it. They want to put units into market, right? At market rate, whatever they want to call it. But they're putting people at risk. They're putting vulnerable people at risk. I know of a building right now in the second district, right, where there's a veteran who has PTSD and there's constant construction happening. I just don't imagine what they're going through, right? There's another case in the same building actually where the property management company, like the construction crew, actually broke the ceiling of one of the other tenants while they were jackhammering the top unit. So it's like, till when? When does this stop? When do we cross the line? It's really hard for us to determine that, right? And that's why we're asking for a policy that's strict, and that the ideal thing is enforcement. If we had an enforcement agency in the city, code enforcement right now, I don't know what their like capability is right now, right? But we are getting calls from tenants who are saying, "Yo, my unit is like really under code, and like right now that we're all home, we're all feeling it." And this
Mhm.
could be, and this is such as mold, right? Drainage, and so it's really hard. And once again, we wish we would have an enforcement agency.
So, and to be clear, this harassment protection component does not have enforcement connected to it, right?
That is correct. It falls back on the tenant, right, and the organizations, and good landlords to obey this law. Um, yeah,
And then, we just got a question from a Spanish speaker too about seguimos siendo acosados y nos cortan el agua. So, again, someone being harassed and having their water cut off. I don't know if this can apply to that too, as far as, giving them a letter. Would you recommend for things like that? Or calling the city to
they
see if
can
they
they,
can,
they can call the city. I think that's the route that we've gone. Call your city council representative and let them know what's going on, right? Let them know what company is doing it, who's your property management company, or who the landlord is. Because it's important to keep documents, right? Also document it yourself, write everything in paper. Any calls that you get, any text messages, you know, don't agree to anything verbally. Make sure everything is written out. And so I don't know if anyone's translating this, but I can translate it right now if that's okay.
yes, please.
Um,
Go ahead.
Sí, sí, por favor, si está siendo acosado o acosado por la compañía con que le estén apagando el agua, llámale a su concejal o a la ciudad también para reportar esto. Es muy importante que todo esto quede documentado. También ustedes escriban todo, cuándo pasó, a qué hora pasó, qué tanto largo tardó el apague del agua o de la luz o de lo que esté pasando. Y es muy importante que ustedes mismos tengan esos records por cualquier cosa que algún día tenga que ir a corte.
Perfect. And we'll make sure to have them connect with you. You can share your contact information at the end. Another one that came in earlier was, can landlords charge late fees with late rental payment? That's a good question. I'm not sure if you know that answer.
So the answer to that is no, they shouldn't be charging late fees right now. That's part of the eviction moratorium. But once again, you do have to follow the steps outlined in the eviction moratorium, which is letting the landlord know. So that's where we're at. They shouldn't be charging late fees, but you do have to take the adequate steps of like letting the landlord know that, hey, I'm gonna be short on my rent. This is how much I can afford to pay right now. And you could go through the repayment period, or you can land on some sort of agreement. But it's a case by case basis. So the actual answer is no, they shouldn't be charging you late fees if you've taken the correct steps as the law has outlined.
So having that proper documentation is going to be key for that.
Sending a letter, of course, to the landlord stating this is how much I can afford to pay, this is how much I'm paying you, and then that will also help them out to not get charged those late fees.
Got it. We're getting a couple more questions coming in. I'm not sure about this one. Are landlords forbidden from lower rents because of the Fair Housing Act? I'm not sure if I understand that question.
So I guess someone asked the landlord if they can lower the rents. That's a very common thing that has been happening. We've been telling folks, right, to hey, ask your landlord to meet you halfway, right? Ask them to lower rents. We haven't heard of it happening, to be honest with you. We've heard of landlords accepting partial rent,
Mhm.
but of course, like the other half or the other, like 80% or 75% is going to be owed. But when it comes down to like the Fair Housing Act, I'm not too sure, so I don't want to mislead anybody.
Got it. Another one is from the landlord's point of view. Some tenants are taking advantage and not communicating with management nor making an effort to pay anything. What is an owner supposed to do?
And so that's why there's also a process, right, outlined in the law, right, where and it's just common like tenant and tenant landlord relationship, right? It's like you take the proper steps as if you were going to evict and do a 3-day pay or quit, and that should like trigger, right, the tenant to then send in a letter stating the reasons on why they're not paying their rent if they cannot pay. We're always going to hear the side of like, hey, they're taking advantage. We know they can pay, but how do we really know? It goes back to like, how do you determine like harassment and non-harassment? It's like, how do you really know if someone's taking advantage or not? We
Mhm.
never know what the personal situation is, and like, unless you're like a private investigator or investigating someone, then that's how you would really know. Um, but usual like practice that we see is when someone doesn't pay the rent, 3-day pay or quit notice is sent to the tenant, and then if the tenant doesn't pay, then the eviction process begins. But as of right now, the courts aren't working, so there's not going to be much happening.
And then this another question: all Long Beach landlords with 4 or more units pay for the PERHIP, PRHIP. I forgot what that acronym is for.
Hmm.
So they know how many units each person or entity owns. Can the city help landlords with a maximum limit of 4, 8, or 16 first? I know you were talking about protection against large property landlords, not small and pop.
It all depends on city and political will. Is the will there for the politicians to act on things like this? That's a good conversation to bring up with their council representative and see where that goes. Um, Home ownership, right, is also another thing that has been brought up in the past, right? That we hear that there should be pathways to home ownership, and as of right now, like a very common thing or something that was happening is like condo conversions. They were
Mhm.
happening a lot, so they were taking units off the market as well. So it's kind of difficult in that sense. But imagine if we lived in a city where folks can actually own their unit. Um, there wouldn't be that many like big corporate landlords. It'd be more local.
So I want to go back to the resources for tenants. I know you talked about Legal Aid Foundation, which does a lot of the legal work. Is there any I guess, other nonprofits that you kind of connect with, that you have your clients, or that you help out and transfer them,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, so there's also Housing Long Beach, right? Also assisting tenants through this. And they're also part of all the work that we're doing here in the city when it comes down to policy. Um, but Long Beach is one of those cities that's like very under resourced for the size that it is. Even with the two organizations doing tenant organizing, it's not enough, right? And we can only do our best. But nonetheless, this is where we also have to advocate, right, as a community on what are the needs of the community. What do people want to see? Ideally, like I said, and I've said in the past, is that we need a housing department in Long Beach that deals with like tenant landlord issues, right? A specific department that can actually listen to both sides and be a mediator between it. There is a fair housing, but it's like, is that enough, and is that like accessible to all? And sometimes, just to be honest with you, like it depends. It goes case by case, and some folks feel more comfortable asking for help than others, and some people trust the city more than the nonprofits as well.
I think probably the undocumented community here as well. I
Yeah.
know that's been a form of harassment, kind of threatening them to call ICE or anything. I've heard of those. And speaking of the undocumented community, I know local organizations that I think Libre was part of as well had started a fund for undocumented families that may not be able to get those stimulus checks. But from what you had told me before our live chat, was that filled up right away.
Yeah, so we're actually not a part of it, but we did support it, right? We hosted a virtual event. The organizations that are organizing that is Housing Long Beach, the Long Beach Immigrant Rights Coalition, um, DSA Long Beach as well. And so there's another foundation involved. I'm blanking out on the name right now. But yeah, I mean, they opened up a fund. They had approximately, I think, $34,000, and they opened it up, and within like 2 3 hours, like over 100 applications had gone in, and just the amount wasn't enough to cover everybody. So they had to like shut down the application right away. I mean, it goes back to the need, right? And we look at the current state aid that's coming in for undocumented folks, and the lines and the websites crashed yesterday. And so it goes back to the need. There's a high need because folks are desperate. I think that 95% of the calls that we're receiving right now are from folks who are undocumented, who aren't receiving those like either unemployment benefits or the stimulus checks.
And I know, even with we're creating a resource guide that we're adding to it, and so far only one nonprofit can really help with rent relief. All the other ones require folks to go in as clients and do documentation and intake. So it is a big process if they're looking for rent relief as well, and it's not that easy. um, and then I just wanted to to close out, what are some of the things that you're looking forward to? What are you keeping an eye on, either locally or statewide, that could possibly help renters?
Yeah, so as of right now, I mean, the tonight's vote is going to be vital onto where this goes, on where the housing justice movement goes, on where politics stand, right, when it comes down to the tenant community in Long Beach, which is the majority. So that's, I think, as of right now, like the biggest thing on the plate. We're also keeping an eye on 1410 to see where that goes, right? What ends up happening as well. There's also national stuff happening, right? There's a ton of stuff happening around housing. And so it's all up in the air on exactly what's going to end up coming down. But then also, it's like we need the political will to help protect the tenants. And tonight is going to be vital. I mean, we're going to see both sides of the arguments come in, right? Some districts have more renters than others. And so some districts are hit harder than others. And so we're hoping that today we can touch our hearts and say, hey, we stand with the renter population, which is the majority of our community, and we pass policy today, or take the first step to passing a policy.
And I will add that I know the mayor said that he was going to announce some details about a rental assistance program later this week. So we'll be keeping an eye on that as well. And I wanted to make sure that you can let folks know who need to get in touch with Libre. If you can, in English and Spanish, let folks know where they can communicate with you and get help.
Yeah, most def. So the easiest way to get a hold of us, right, is through either our social media, right, or feel free to email us. But our social media on Facebook, we're known as Long Beach Residents Empowered. And we're always posting stuff on there to keep people updated on what's happening, whether it's policy, whether it's just simply frequently asked questions, or even like a rent strike guide for folks. We also have our website that's under construction, but it's available and it has a resource page on there right now, and it's the www.wearelbre.org. Um, and then Instagram as well. It's we are LBRE. And email wise is it's contact contact@lbre@gmail.com. And just feel free to send your question down there. We'll be glad to answer it, or follow up on your case if you have something going on and refer you to legal help in Spanish. So la forma más fácil de conectarse con nosotros es por Facebook. Estamos ahí en Facebook como Long Beach Residents Empowered, o nos pueden también contactar por correo electrónico en contact.lbre@gmail.com, pero en español completo es contact.lbre@gmail.com, y ahí pueden mandar su pregunta y nosotros con todo gusto se la contestaremos. We also have a legal clinic every Wednesday from 3 to 6, and the number for that is 223-439-5224. And once again, that's 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. on Wednesdays. And that's connecting folks to legal resources. And that's our legal clinic. En Spanish, de 3 a 6 cada miércoles tenemos una clínica legal a la que pueden llamar. El número es 323-439-5224. Una vez más, ¿verdad? Tenemos una clínica legal de 3 a 6 cada miércoles, y el número es 323-439-5224.
Thank you, Beto. Once again, Beto Lopez, Program Director, Project Director of Libre. Thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.